Society and the Research Foundation of CFA Institute. And my name is Bud Haslett. I'm the Executive Director of the Research Foundation of CFA Institute. It's a real honor to be here today. And what we're doing today is to launch our new monograph. We call monographs because we've been calling them that for 20 years. It's a book, LifeCycle Investing, Financial Education, and Consumer Protection. And it is just being launched now, but the genesis of this goes back many, many years. And this was based off of a conference that was started by Bodie. And he's done an excellent job. The Research Foundation has been involved with 3 of these, so if you would like to see some of the past monographs, they're available on the website, free of charge to be downloaded. And for those of you who don't know Bodie, he's a very wonderful person, and I know that every time I get an email from him, I always get very excited because it always has this great information in it. And so I'm going to introduce V, so he will provide you with the great information that I am accustomed to seeing from him. So, V.
Thanks very much for that kind introduction. I have to start off with a question. How many of you have heard me speak before? All right, I can't use my best jokes. All right, that was my first confession, by the way. So I entitled this Confessions of an Educator, and I'm not going to take very long because what I'd really like to do is start a discussion amongst us about how to move financial education, in particular investor education, objective investor education of the general public forward. And I'm sure you've got lots of opinions that I am interested in hearing from you. So I only have 4 slides. Okay? I hear the sigh of relief.
Including the title slide?
No, that's the 5th. Good point. And I think I added this slide just so that there'd be an extra one too.
Will this be on the exam?
And there will be, yes, there will be an exam on this. This is the seeds of a future MOOC. How many of you know what a MOOC is? M-O-O-C. Ed, tell us all what a MOOC is.
Massive, open, online course.
Right. It's what has all of the universities in this country and around the world shaking with trepidation because it's free higher education, and many of these courses are produced by the best faculty at the best universities. So I actually have taken 2 MOOC courses already. So my first confession is I get by with lots of help from my friends. And I'll be mentioning that. You know, a few of those friends and in what way I rely on them for help. But it's more than I'm happy to acknowledge it now that I'm approaching my twilight years. The Lauren Willis Challenge. Who knows who Lauren Willis is? Well, I'm going to make her famous, starting today. And my prayers, which I've kept secret until now, but I'm going to share some of them with you. So let's take the first one. I get by with lots of help from my friends. And I'll be introducing some of the people in this room whose help I shamelessly employ, not always with acknowledgement. Today will be an exception. So the Mertens, father and son, Robert C. Merton and Robert K. Merton, his father, the great sociologist, Merton and I, Bob was supposed to make a cameo appearance at lunch today, but he arrived back from Frankfurt late last night, so he was not making any promises. But he may show up. He is featured prominently in this book. In fact, in many ways, his keynote speech at the beginning of the conference set the tone for the rest of the conference. But I've known Bob since starting my graduate studies at MIT. We both looked up to Paul Samuelson as our role model, and we've been doing lots of research together ever since. Okay, you may have heard of Bodie, Kane, and Marcus. I just want to share with you very quickly the BKM investments story. This is the 25th anniversary of the first edition of Bodie, Kane, Marcus Investments. It has had many publishers. In fact, the history of that book is sort of the history of what's been happening to the publishing industry in the United States, and the world for that matter, because it's been translated into about 15 languages. And it goes wherever the CFA program goes. Okay, so it's in Chinese translation. One of my students who is here from China, Jin Li, can testify to this. When I have Chinese students in my classes here, invariably they say to me, and I know the Chinese, I think, like to flatter people. This may be a national trait, but they say, "Oh, you're famous in China." I say, "That's great because nobody knows me here." But at the time that we wrote the first edition, Bill Sharp's book. How many of you have ever read Bill Sharp's textbook? It used to be the leading textbook, and rightly so. Anyone who taught investments loved Bill Sharp's book. The students hated it. And so the issue was not improving the content, really. The issue was making it more student-friendly. And at the time, this was the mid-'80s, I was active at the NBER, National Bureau of Economic Research, in a study of pension funds, the pension industry, and Bill Sharp was one of the key speakers. He was very heavily involved in it, so I got friendly with him. I said, "Bill, here are the things you need to do to improve your textbook." And anyone who knows Bill Sharp knows how gracious the man is. And he said, "Oh, yes, those are great suggestions." Nothing changed. Nothing. So all we had to do really was take his content and the supplementary stuff that we had written so that our students would understand the book and publish it. And Steve Ross, who was a consultant to the publishing company, this was Times Mirror Mosby, that was our original publisher. Steve Ross says, "Well, you know, they want me to organize a whole list of publications. I've said I'm going to write a corporate finance textbook with Randy Westerfield. Why don't you write an investments textbook?" And I said to Alex and Alan, and this is my confession, there's no way that I will be able to do this without significant help. And they said, "Okay, let's do it." And that was the origin of the Bodie Kane Investments textbook. And the rest is history. You know, it's actually become a very, at least to believe our publisher, we have the lion's share of the market for investments textbooks. However, I just recently, you may have read this, you know, McGraw-Hill was not the original publisher. So we went from Times Mirror Mosby to Irwin to McGraw-Hill. And now, McGraw-Hill has sold out to the Apollo Group, a private equity firm. I can tell you, we're thrilled. We're thrilled because, you know, traditional textbooks are in big trouble. We need some very, very creative thinking about how to approach the market for electronic textbooks in the future. So here's hoping we get a lot of help from the Apollo Group. The CFA Institute. I love the CFA Institute. One of the keys to the success of our textbook was that we said one thing that will really help make Sharp's book more user-friendly is if we use questions from the CFA exams. Why? Well, you can, you know, it doesn't take a genius to figure out why, right? Because it was designed to be very real world. And I believe that the CFA Institute has done a fantastic job over the years of bridging that gulf between the underlying science of investments and economics and the world of applied investments. Now, you're hearing this from a guy who's very critical of the applied world of investments. And that's because, in my view, a lot of what passes for investment management is actually sales. It's not investment management at all. It's just marketing and hype. But that's for them to confess, okay? Not for me. So let's get back to my confessions. Boston University has been extremely supportive of whatever initiative that I've come up with. Now, I would say the best initiative that I have ever come up with is talking the CFA Institute into co-sponsoring, and with a substantial amount of money, I should add. Bud can attest to this because they're no longer willing to do it. Not his fault, but the first two conferences were largely financed by the CFA Institute Research Foundation, and they were pretty expensive conferences, and hopefully you're going to get all the money back and then some. So now BU is supporting the implementation of some of my prayers. Oh, I don't think I'm done. Ah, yes! Bob Powell was probably wondering, where am I? Okay, so Bob Powell, I said this to a few of the people that I introduced him to today. You all know him as a famous columnist for MarketWatch. And he's recently made the transition into multimedia. He is a one-man producer, director, cameraman, etc. But his retirement column, what's the full title? Retirement Weekly or something like that?
Retirement Weekly.
Right. So Bob has been really extremely, extremely helpful in helping me to convey what I believe is objective investment information to the general public. Bob is a graduate of two programs at Boston University, the School of Communications, journalism, basically, and then he was one of the early graduates of our Certified Financial Planner program. So, you know, to my mind, he represents the best of financial journalism. But, little known fact, Bob, who lives up in Swampscott, is, to my knowledge, the only non-Jew who is president of his local synagogue. I kid you not.
Soon to be out of business synagogue.
So I'll let him tell you that story. Sir. Now, Paul Solomon, some of you may be, he unfortunately couldn't come today, but he is the economics correspondent for the evening news on public television, and one of my favorite TV journalists, and has been a key player in all three of the conferences. He typically is the moderator when we have panels of Nobel Prize winners. You know, like we had, for the second conference, we had, were you at that one, George?
Yes.
We had Paul Samuelson, Bob Solow, Bob Merton, and it was a three-person panel, and this was October of 2008. You remember there were other things going on at that time? That was really a tough time. And Paul moderated a discussion of the crisis and the implications of the crisis, all of that. But our keynote speaker that opened that conference was Peter Diamond, who got his Nobel Prize, what, 2 or 3 years later, I think 2009 or 10. And finally, Doug DeShiel, who's not here, but he's going to see this slide, so I figured I'd better put it in. Doug! I'll just say who Doug is, because he is my authority on all things related to the practice of investment management. I met him when I was working back in 1999 as a consultant to J.P. Morgan, developing a new type of retirement solution. That's what everybody refers to it as, so I will. Doug was the head of proprietary trading, and he was 32 years old. Now, this was the internal hedge fund of J.P. Morgan, basically. And he and I bonded over TIPS, Treasury inflation protected securities, which were brand new, almost brand new at the time. And he was the only practitioner, I mean high-level practitioner, out there who was saying, my God, what a bargain! Okay, because the yield was something like real yield was close to 4% per year. He bought $2 billion worth for the, well, it's a long story. We have been very good friends ever since. He now has his own hedge fund, basically, in New York City called First Principles Capital Management. And he participates actively in co-teaching my course here on advanced topics in investing, sometimes remotely, thanks to the miracle of electronics. He can do that. Okay, Lauren Willis's challenge. Now, since you don't even know who Lauren Willis is, you probably don't know what her challenge is. Lauren, in many ways, I think, was the most controversial speaker in this conference, and her paper is included, is it not? What title did we give it?
The title we gave it is, I don't have my glasses on, so...
I don't have my glasses.
Financial education, lessons not learned, and lessons learned.
Right. And here is her message. Educator, do no harm. Lauren, who is a law professor, but specializes in consumer protection law, is convinced, and she's managed to convince me, that most investment education material does more harm than good. Okay, and that's for two reasons. And she's talking about the general education, but she's not talking about the CFA program, of course. She's talking about, you know, if you go to a website, I don't care whether it's Fidelity or Vanguard, certainly not TIA Prep. Leave them out of this. And you go to the investor education tab, that stuff is harmful for two reasons. The first is that a lot of it is wrong, which is not a good thing to, you know, for educational material. It's wrong because it says if you have a long time horizon, stocks are going to beat everything else. So it talks about stocks as the growth asset, not the aggressive risk asset. That's very harmful. Now, we both know it's both, right? It has the highest potential for growth and the highest potential for disaster. That's why we think, in the theory, there's a risk premium associated with it. But if you can earn the risk premium without bearing the risk, then it isn't risky. I mean, it's elementary. And yet, that is at the heart of most of the investor education materials, including those promulgated by our own government. The regulations of the Department of Labor, EBSA, Employee Benefit Security Administration, say that you've got to have a significant amount of stocks in a portfolio in order for it to be considered a QDIA, Qualified Default Investment Alternative. So you could have 100% invested in TIPS or a stable value fund. That will not qualify under current regs as a qualified default investment alternative. That strikes me as nuts, but that's the way things are. And when I complain, and here we get to the second problem that Lauren, well, there are really three problems that she draws attention to. So the first is some of the basic content of the so-called investor education materials is wrong, misleading, biased. Secondly, in some ways, it takes the industry and the government off the hook in terms of protecting ordinary people from products that might be very dangerous and risky. Because the notion is, as long as you disclose in the small print what the truth is, you know, it's like a lot of federal regulation. Sometimes you say, well, why isn't the small print up on top and the marketing pitch in the small print? But, you know, it's not the American way. So she thinks that by providing this so-called educational material, the investment industry, it gets off the hook. And it creates the illusion of knowledge. Not real knowledge, but the illusion of knowledge. And the third thing that she indicts them for, although this is, given the first two, I'm not sure whether the third thing is bad or good. The third thing is, it doesn't work. Okay? That people do not retain anything of significance from the so-called investor education programs. They may sort of remember one or two things like diversification pays, but then they don't quite understand what that means. right? So you find a lot of them, no matter how many options are offered, they invest 1/n of their money in that option, right? You know, this is one of the sort of silly research findings we have, but true. So, at any rate, I think this represents a tremendous challenge to the industry, and it's something that I personally am committed to trying to change, which gets me to my prayers. Now, I've kept it to a minimum, and of course, it's clean. I'm not going to share my fantasies with you, although you may think this is a fantasy. And here's where I talk about the project that I'm engaged in now with Carrie Locke-Bedard, who's sitting in the corner there, and she is sitting at a table where hopefully everyone is committed to some aspect of this project. So I'll make some introductions to the people I know. I've just met Alice, and from the Massachusetts Council for Economic Education. And I guess Stephanie is also, from the BSAS, I think, is also committed to this. And I know my colleague Irena, who teaches investments here at BU, and does all of our multimedia extended outreach, not yet MOOC, but maybe soon MOOC, investment education. And that is to teach in the most effective way possible the basics of personal finance and investing as a science. So my ambition, and we'll see, how much of it, if any, can be achieved, is I believe that basic financial education ought to be part of what is currently called the STEM subjects, S-T-E-M. That stands for, and I hope I get this right, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Why? Because I believe today you need the same skills to make sensible financial decisions, certainly to make sensible investment decisions that involve the trade-off between risk and reward. You need to be fairly sophisticated in your thinking, in your understanding of the way the world works to get a grasp of what risk means, what investment risk means, how we measure it, and how we manage it. So that's what I'm hoping for. And Carrie, who is a graduate of our own MBA program and has at least 10 years, I forget how many, I don't want to age you artificially, experience working in the production and distribution of educational materials. You worked at McGraw-Hill, which I guess your division may now be part of the Apollo group.
That's true.
Could be. In any event, we're trying to get this program off the ground by offering a basic program to our own undergraduate freshmen here at BU, a pilot project that we're going to be launching soon in cooperation with the School of Education at Boston University. But my feeling, and this is, there's lots of research showing that people in general don't retain much of what they learn in school. Any of you may have read the work of Howard Gardner, right? The guy who came up with the idea of multiple intelligences, as professor of education at Harvard. And his conclusion is that we forget roughly 95% of what we learn in school. And the little bit that we do retain is if we actually need it for our profession. It's shocking, but I have no doubt it's true just from observing myself, honestly. I mean, I have to keep refreshing what I know about various things or it gets lost. In any event, I think there's a much better chance of people retaining their understanding and their capability to make rational financial decisions and certainly investment decisions if we make it part of the math and science curriculum from K through 12 right through university. So that's that. Am I running out of time? Well, I still have a few minutes before I open it up. And secondly, my prayer is retirement becomes a dirty word. I consider it, I don't know about you, but when I hear somebody saying proudly that they're retired, I secretly say to myself, leech. What does it mean to retire? You stop contributing to society? Now, if what the person means is I'm not working for money anymore, I'm devoting myself to some other pursuit, and again, I don't mean the golf course or the mahjong table or whatever it is, but I mean some reasonably productive social activity, I think retirement has outlived its usefulness as a stage of life. Frankly, I'm turning 70 this April. The people who I know and admire in my age cohort are all still going strong. Unless, for health reasons, they can't. But, in this age of ability to sit in front of a computer and do things, you don't even have to type, you can dictate. How much physical ability do you need in order to keep actively engaged? So, not only do I pray this, but I think it has a reasonable chance, and here's the reason. Most people will not be able to retire. And that's the good news. Everybody talks about it as if it's a crisis. It's no crisis, it's great. All right, so that ends my prepared statements. And I'd like to hear your reactions to any or all aspects of the financial, you don't have to discuss the retirement part, but financial education. Yes?
Thank you very much for your comments. Wonderful, they were wonderful. I wanted to ask you about a question about efficient market theory, right? It's
Yes,
a very
sir.
predominant theory.
I'll repeat the question as soon as.
Yeah, so it says that or maybe it's interpreted that it's impossible to beat the market, right? By
That's the strong form,
Exactly.
extreme.
And it's taught in most of the classes, right, that you can take. So I think it's difficult, and many practitioners, such as Seth Klarman, say thank you for this because it is possible to beat the market, and for as long as many students are convinced that it is impossible, they would not even try. What do you think about this? Is it a service or disservice, efficient markets theory? Is it a service or disservice to investment profession? And if I could draw a parallel, in any other pursuit, like for example in running, there is that people with abilities who invest a lot of time in their abilities, such as Usain Bolt in running, you can't say that he wins championship by chance. That you would know that every year he would be close to the top. So I would appreciate
Right,
your
okay,
comments.
so
Thank you.
wonderful question. And one to which I and my co-authors of the textbook have given much thought. Because, you know, the same thing applies to the textbook. If you can't beat the market, why study the subject and buy our textbook? And my approach and our approach in the textbook is to say, that's not the way we view the efficient market theory, or usually it's referred to as the efficient market hypothesis. And when you frame it that way, I think it's the appropriate way to frame it. Because what it says is, the null hypothesis that is constantly being tested by professionals is you can't beat the market. So if you think you can, okay, the burden of proof is on you. And it is not enough to have a successful year. Right? I start my course off, the very first thing that I do in discussing risk and reward is I tell my students to take out a coin and flip it 10 times. And then we tabulate the results. And you all know what you get, right? It's going to be a distribution, the number of heads, right? And in a class of 50 students, there's sometimes one who actually gets heads every time. And I say to the students, okay, what do we conclude? Is this, you know, is Carrie, because she got 10 heads, the champion coin flipper? All right, so that's the example of pure chance. Now, having said that, there's always somebody in the class who wants to examine her coin. Okay? It couldn't just be pure chance. Or, worse yet, someone who says, show us how you flipped it. In other words, that's the approach I think everyone should take to claims of good investment management performance. Now, some people say that's too high a burden of proof. I don't think so. I think track record alone will never convince me that an investment manager has skill rather than luck. And that includes Warren Buffett. If Warren Buffett were not able to explain to us how he does it, which he's very capable of doing, okay? If I just looked at his track record, I would never agree that he has skill rather than luck. Because you know how many observations you would have to rule out chance? Way too many. So it has to be the process that convinces you that a person is skillful. In that sense, it's different from the runner. It's a lot easier to determine whether a runner has skill at running quickly. Although even now, given what Lance Armstrong has confessed, even that's in doubt, right? Did the person dope himself up? Now that's not luck, that's manipulation or cheating. But I think that for a field like investment management, the null hypothesis has to be you can't beat the market unless you've got some skill at either market timing, you know, macro skill, or micro skill. Now Warren Buffett will tell you, he says, I don't think I have any macro skill. Although then he will then go out and say, well, I'm betting big on the U.S. economy because I think we're going to recover. I consider that macro skill. But he considers it, I think, good citizenship, right? He wants to boost everybody's morale and confidence in the U.S. economy, and he's in a position to do that, actually. So I don't know how much of his motivation is that, but that the guy is good at finding undervalued corporations, I have no doubt about it. No doubt. And he's the first one to admit that he makes mistakes. Okay, he's made some bad decisions. And up close and personal, I have 2 daughters, neither of whom has any interest whatsoever in finance. They both married investment professionals as a consolation prize to their father. And one of them is incredible. I think he's as good as Warren Buffett. And every move he makes, he explains to me. In a million years, I never would have thought of it. But it makes a lot of money for the firm he works for and for him. So in that sense, I don't think markets are efficient, but I think people like my son-in-law and Warren Buffett make it pretty efficient. So that if you don't have those talents, okay, you shouldn't be in the game, or you should recognize you're going to have to work very hard because you're up against stiff competition. That's the way I think we should think of the efficient markets hypothesis. Yes?
How would you integrate the strides we're making in learning about behavioral finance, human behavior in this? How would you integrate that into this curriculum, and how would you actually use those insights to make this more effective education?
Right. Now, I should confess, I didn't put it up there because this is an obscure fact, but I was a master's student at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem in 1968 and took the first course ever taught by Kahneman and Tversky. It was called Decision Processes. And those guys absolutely had me convinced that there is systematic bias to the way we think. Okay, Now, what has confirmed that for me in my 40 years of teaching is that I give exams and students routinely get a lot of the questions wrong. People, surprise, surprise, make mistakes. And they make consequential mistakes. Not only that, but I can predict what mistakes they're going to make, and I design my tests to maximize the number of mistakes. Now, I give that as an example that in some sense there's nothing new here. I mean, my heavens, anyone who sells any product, and I just don't mean investment products, knows how to fool people systematically or get them to do, what probably is not in their best interest, which is what I regard as a mistake. Okay, you do something that's not in your own best interest. That's my definition. So how do we integrate that? Well, the way I would like to see it integrated is every professional, a professional accountant, let's take that. The job of a professional accountant, in my mind, is to help you prepare, let's say, personal accountant, is to help you avoid going to jail because you don't, fill out your tax forms properly. Moreover, the best way they have of doing that is not to play games, right? Not to go up to the edge and then wait for some, examiner, tax examiner, to say, wait a second, that's very questionable. So I know the person who helps me do my taxes in those years when I actually have taxable income is to do it for me, help me do it accurately. Not to cheat the government and not to test the tax code. The last thing I want is to be a test case in tax court. That is what I think investment managers should be doing. We should have standards, professional standards. The law is not just a constraint. I think, for the most part, there are a set of ethical standards that we all, and certainly the CFA is built upon that. I mean, that was one of the primary missions for the creation of the CFA Institute. So, do I think we should incorporate the insights of behavioral science and behavioral finance? Absolutely. In fact, I think it was a mistake not to have done that from the beginning. And I think it's a weakness of traditional economics. I mean, the social sciences need to be studied as an integrated whole. We're talking about how people behave in society. And there's positive and normative. In other words, descriptive and prescriptive. And to me, prescriptive means how do you guide people so they make fewer mistakes for themselves and for society. And, I think we've seen in extreme form in this crisis, what are the consequences of ignorance? And ignorance not just on the part of the customers, who took out those mortgages that they couldn't afford, the ignorance of the regulators. So, yes, I think it needs to be part of the curriculum. I haven't really kept track with exactly what's in the current curriculum. But behavioral science, to my mind, is a core part of what you need to learn. Just as important as ethics, let's say, professional ethics. Yes, sir?
Professor Bodie, I appreciate your views about the investment profession. In thinking about your education project, what do you see as the measure of success
That's
for
a
your project?
great question.
What-
It's hard, I don't know. Why don't I toss it back to you? What would be the measure of success? I'm not going to avoid the question altogether. But, you're talking to somebody who gives exams for a living, right, in some ways. So certainly that has to be part of it. There's competence. So I'd like to see an improvement in scores as measured in those conventional ways. By the way, as you're well aware, there's a great controversy going on in our educational system today as to whether you want standardized tests or, what are you really measuring with these tests? So all of that applies to financial competency as well and financial capability. But there certainly are some things like what is the prevalence of mistakes that you see people making, and that can be measured. I mean, that's basically a lot of the research into behavioral finance that Ariely does and all these others is exactly that. In fact, Ariely is a fantastic public speaker. I heard that he just gave a talk, or was it Ed? Was it a crowd of TIAA craft? So Ed, who's in charge of, is your title marketing or product development or what?
Client relations, sales.
Sales. For TIAA craft, Ariely is a hugely entertaining speaker. Why? He describes what people actually do. It's funny. It's so stupid, it's funny. So if somehow we could improve upon that, and there are lots of ways I could think of measuring it, but it's very hard to measure what the results of an educational process are. And there's always going to be controversy about what the right thing is. Yeah?
Does Financial Engines have a good model for helping people succeed with their 401k plan?
That is a terrific question. And, all these questions are terrific. I discussed this with Bill Sharp, not infrequently. And the reason is because Bill and I are in complete agreement about just about anything you can think of, including the role of tips and safe assets. My big beef against the whole 401k marketplace is the natural place to start thinking about the trade-off between risk and reward is the safest possible portfolio. Okay? Because we know it's going to come down to a trade-off. So you got to start someplace, and the best place to start is find the safest point on the frontier. That's not what is done. It's not what is done by Financial Engines. The only company that used to do it was TIAA-CREF in the good old days when they had just the guaranteed annuity. What could be safer than that? But competitive pressure from the industry drove them to abandon that philosophy. They too, if you ask, for a default option in TIAA-CREF today, they'll put you into a target date fund. Well, that may or may not be appropriate. There is no guidance at any website that I know of, and Financial Engines is not alone, this includes Vanguard, everything, that says, let's start from 100% I bonds. By far and away the safest thing that you can invest in, because unlike tips, there's no downside risk with I bonds. They can only go up in both nominal terms and real terms. The safest investment by far. And what's more, it's for the long run. They have a 30-year maturity. Okay, with lots of optionality. So you can get your money out whenever you want. All these wonderful things. Why don't we start there? And then, now, here's the problem. Rate of return, 0. Inflation adjusted. Well, that's what the message you want to get out to people is. You don't take any risk, you want complete safety. Yes, you'll be able to preserve the purchasing power of your money, but that's all. It won't grow. Now, you want to take risk, you can get a higher return. But you know what? You can also get a lower return. That's where it all starts. I don't see any website that does that, including Financial Engines. In fact, test this out if you have the time or interest. I do it all the time when I see, one of these calculators, online calculators for asset allocation. There's a series of questions that is designed to help you figure out your risk tolerance. They all, as far as I can tell, work in the following way. They ask you what your time horizon is. Okay? If you say your time horizon is more than 10 years, you're going to be told to put at least half your money in the stock market. Now, what if I answer all the other questions in such a way as to indicate that I am as risk averse as they come? And the only indication I give that I may not be is that I have a long time horizon. will they tell me to put all my money in TIPS or I bonds? Which is what they should do. I think we can agree on that, right? No. No matter how you answer, if you say you have a long time horizon, by which they mean more than 10 years, half your money is going to be put into stocks. That, to my mind, is inexcusable. Because everyone knows, any well-educated financial economist knows Samuelson's proof. That time horizon is quite different from risk aversion. You can have a long time horizon. It will not have any effect on your risk aversion under his assumptions. Okay? And that was something I learned as a graduate student here in 1970. Not here, but at MIT. It's very well known. It's featured prominently in the Bodie King Marcus textbook. So how come when you go to any of the popular websites, including Sharp's, okay, because it's a commercial venture, it's not science, it's a commercial venture, you're led to the conclusion you have to put half your money in the stock market? I rest my case.
Just one more question, please.
Al.
We obviously support your work and wanting it in the K-12 classroom. What we find is that teachers do not have the competence and confidence to teach this. And when we look at personal finance, the area they have the least confidence is in investing. So if you were to choose, 5 concepts that teachers must know in order to teach this, what would you say they were?
Well, it's interesting because I had a conversation yesterday, just yesterday, with the people at the U.S. Treasury who are responsible for their retail investment products, which means TIPS and savings bonds. They have zero marketing budget. Okay, that's the first important thing to realize. But, fortunately, because it's cheap to build a website, they have a great website. Of course, nobody knows to go there. It's treasurydirect.gov/iBonds. That's where I go. And there's great material there. And what I proposed to them is I said, why don't you folks team up with a university like BU, and I offered myself, and teach the basics of investing through I-bonds. Now think for a second what you need to know. What are the 5 things that you learn just by understanding the features of I-bonds? The first thing you learn is the difference between safe and risky. Because I-bonds are safe in the long run, including inflation risk. So they put the lie to the conventional junk that you find at every website, including the SEC's investor education website, that says you may think that bank accounts, insured bank accounts, and bonds are safe, but you're ignoring the risk of inflation. Because I-bonds are fully protected against inflation. They don't say that at the SEC website. They don't say there are I-bonds which offer a long-term rate of return with no risk of inflation. That's the very same government, folks. And when I said this to the Treasury officials, they said, tell us about it. They said, that's a different division. So that's point number 1. The difference between safe and risky. What could be more fundamental than that in investing? But it gets better. What about real versus nominal interest rates? And how you take account of inflation. Pretty basic. In fact, if you take a course in economics, in macroeconomics, the first thing you learn is the difference between real and nominal GDP. In investing, the first thing you should learn is the difference between real, in other words, inflation adjusted, and nominal interest and rates of return. So that's very important. Third is the power of compounding. Now, when you earn an interest rate of 0, how powerful is compounding? Okay? If you go to any conventional website, they assume 8% return. My God, state and local government says, we have among us the chief investment officer for the retirement system of Maine. Stand up and be counted. And he knows as well as I, in fact, we discussed this quite a bit, that state and local government plans still assume 7%, 7.5% rate of return on assets. And that's what they're discounting their liabilities at. And their liabilities in some cases are inflation protected. It's crazy. And we wonder why we have a crisis of underfunding now in state and local pension plans. This is the consequence of miseducation. So, the notion of compounding and discounting, if you have a real liability or a real target, you should be using the real rate of interest. That actually can be negative, as anybody who's looked at the TIPS yield curve lately realizes. TIPS yields are negative. And we're told, and here's the ridiculous thing, what's the conclusion if TIPS yields are negative? Don't invest in TIPS? Hell no, that means conventional treasuries have an even more negative yield on an inflation-adjusted basis. What's more, they're risky in real terms. So, there's no understanding among professionals, many professionals, and certainly the regulators, of these are basic concepts. Another basic concept, tax deferral versus tax exemption. Okay? I-bonds are tax deferred for certain purposes. In fact, they are. All interest earned on I-bonds is tax deferred until you cash it. But if you use them for certain educational purposes, they become tax exempt, subject to an income test. Well, that's a wonderful lesson to teach the difference between, tax advantages of different types. It's just a wonderful way to teach basic concepts. That is what I was pitching to them. And I pitch it to you as well. Because I think it could, and my own view is, we should take math and science teachers from the high schools and send them to summer camp. All expenses paid, to teach them some basic finance. Incidentally, you know who is actually doing this? None other than Salman Khan of Khan Academy. He started a summer camp, but for kids, not for teachers. I think the teachers need it for exactly the reason that you gave.
We get more leverage.
Absolutely. That's why Carrie and I are working with the School of Education here.
Okay, we have to conclude.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your excellent presentation, and thanks for your work on the LifeCycle Investing series. We're going to have coffee and dessert in a moment. I'd really like to thank Boston University for hosting this, the Boston Security Analyst Society for the great work they do. They're one of my favorite societies, even though I'm from Philadelphia. Stephanie Field did a great job.
Your daughter goes to Boston University.
Yes, my daughter goes to Boston
Full
University. Yeah, I'm not going to be
disclosure.
able to see her today. But anyway, and I'd like to thank CFA Institute for their support with the Research Foundation. The monograph and all of our monographs are available free as a PDF download and on ebooks. And if any of you have any ideas how we can share this information with whomever, we're very interested in talking with you. So please enjoy it and give us suggestions on future topics. Thank you very much.